He almost didn't stop. Daniel Reeves was already 3 steps past the bus stop when something made him turn around. Not instinct, not kindness, just a sound, so small, so broken, it barely registered over the October wind. A breath, maybe a moan, something alive that had no business being alive in this cold. He turned, he looked, and what he saw stopped him cold. She wasn't a pile of clothes. She was a person. And nobody, not one single soul in this entire city, had stopped for her. Here's the part nobody tells you. What happened next didn't just save her life. It completely destroyed the one he thought he was living. Drop a comment right now. Tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button. You do not want to miss what happens next. The night Daniel Reeves almost walked past the most important moment of his life started the same way every other terrible night started, with Mia coughing. She'd been at it since Tuesday, that deep, rattling cough that climbed up through the floorboards of their second-story apartment and grabbed him by the chest every single time. 3 years of raising a child alone had turned Daniel into a man who could measure the severity of his daughter's fever by the sound of her breathing from 2 rooms away. Tonight, it was bad. Not hospital bad, but bad enough that he'd stood in the doorway of her bedroom for a full minute, watching the rise and fall of her small chest under the blanket, doing the quiet math that single fathers do. Medicine. Tonight. Non-negotiable. He'd grabbed his coat off the hook by the door, the same brown canvas jacket he'd been wearing for 6 years, the one with the frayed left cuff his wife Sarah had always threatened to fix and never got the chance. And he'd walked out into the October night. Riverside, California didn't do cold the way the northern states did, but late October had a particular kind of mean to it. Not the dramatic, honest cold of Chicago or Detroit. It was sneaky cold. The kind that got into your bones slowly, while you were busy thinking about other things. Daniel was busy thinking about other things. He was thinking about the $340 he still owed on the water bill. He was thinking about the crack in the brake rotor on Vehicle 7 at the shop that his boss, Gary, kept asking him about. He was thinking about whether the CVS on Fletcher would still be open, or whether he'd have to walk the extra 6 blocks to the 24-hour pharmacy on Monroe and hope he had enough on the Visa. He was thinking about Sarah. He did that most on cold nights. That particular kind of quiet, shapeless grief that doesn't announce itself. It just settles on your shoulders like extra weight when you're already tired. She'd been gone 2 years and 4 months. Breast cancer, stage 3, diagnosed 14 months before she died. He had done everything right. Insurance, second opinions. He had driven her to every appointment. He had learned the names of every medication. He had held her hand through every round of chemo and told her every single day that she was going to be fine. He had been wrong. And now he was the only parent Mia had. And Mia needed cough medicine. And that was the whole world. That was the entire, manageable, suffocating world of Daniel Reeves at 11:47 on a Thursday night in October. He walked with his hands shoved deep in his pockets, head down against the wind, moving the way exhausted men move, not fast, not slow, just forward. The street was mostly empty. A car rolled past. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice and went quiet. The amber glow of the streetlights made everything look like an old photograph. He was 3 blocks from the CVS when he passed the bus stop on Garfield. It was the kind of bus stop that had a metal bench and a plastic shelter. The kind of shelter that blocked maybe 40% of the wind if you positioned yourself just right. He'd passed it 1,000 times. He passed it without looking. Except something made him slow down. He couldn't explain it later, not in any way that made clean, logical sense. He'd tried to, over the years, and he'd always come up short. It wasn't a sound exactly. It wasn't a movement. It was more like the way a room feels different when someone else is in it, even before you see them. A shift in the air, a weight. Daniel stopped walking. He turned around, and he saw her. She was slumped in a wheelchair against the far end of the shelter, positioned almost like she'd been set there and forgotten. And the terrible truth, as he would later learn, was that something very close to that was exactly what had happened. She was young, maybe late 20s, with dark hair plastered against her cheek from the damp cold. She was wearing a thin green jacket that was completely wrong for the temperature, and her hands were bare in her lap, the fingers curled slightly inward, in that particular way that hands curl when they've been cold for a very long time. Her eyes were half open. Daniel walked toward her slowly, the way you approach something fragile. "Hey," he said. "Hey, you okay?" Nothing. "Ma'am." He crouched down to her level, close enough now to see that her lips had taken on a grayish tinge that scared him. "Hey, can you hear me?" Her eyes moved, slow, labored, like lifting something heavy. They found his face and held there, and for a moment she just looked at him with an expression he'd never forget. Not fear, not relief. It was something flatter than both of those. The look of a person who has been waiting so long that they've stopped expecting anything to actually arrive. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was barely there, dry and cracked, like paper. "You don't look fine." Daniel stood, looking around the empty street, then back at her. "How long have you been sitting here?" A pause. "I'm waiting for the bus." He looked up at the route schedule posted on the shelter wall, then back at her. "The last bus on this route ran at 9:15. It's almost midnight." She didn't answer that. "How long?" he asked again. Her jaw tightened. "I'm fine." "I'm not asking if you're fine. I'm asking how long you've been here." Another pause, longer this time. Then quietly, "Since yesterday morning." The words landed on him like something physical. He straightened up and did the math without meaning to. Yesterday morning. That was 36 hours. More. She had been sitting in this shelter, in a wheelchair, with no coat worth a damn, for more than 36 hours. And in that entire stretch of time, not one person in this city had stopped. Daniel stood there for a moment in the wind, and he felt something move through him that he didn't have a clean name for. It wasn't pity. He'd felt pity before, and pity was soft, distant, something you felt on the other side of glass. This was closer than that. This was the feeling you get when you recognize something. When a situation reaches across all the distance between two strangers and grabs you somewhere specific. He'd spent 2 years being the person that nobody stopped for. "What's your name?" he asked. "Hannah." A beat. "Hannah Blake." "I'm Daniel." He looked at her chair, at the thin blanket across her lap that had long since stopped doing any real work. "Is there someone I can call? Family? A friend?" The word friend landed strangely. He watched her face do something subtle. A small tightening around the eyes, a quick press of the lips together. And in that half-second he understood, without being told, that the answer to both questions was no. "There's a shelter on," she started. "I know the shelters on this side of town," Daniel said quietly. He looked at the wheelchair. He looked at the narrow doorways and the single-stall bathrooms and the no-elevator walk-ups he'd passed his whole life in this neighborhood. "They're not going to work for you." She looked at him straight on for the first time. Her eyes were dark, very direct, and behind the exhaustion and the cold and everything else, he could see intelligence, wariness, the hard-earned skepticism of someone who had been offered things by strangers before and learned exactly what those offers cost. "You don't have to do anything," she said. The words were careful, measured. "I'll figure it out." "It's midnight, and it's 42 degrees, and you've been sitting here for 36 hours. Daniel pulled his phone out. "So let me just—" "Please don't call anyone." The words came out fast and flat. Not a request, almost a command. Then, quieter. "Please, I can't go back into the system again. I can't." Daniel lowered his phone. The wind pushed through the shelter. Hannah's fingers tightened slightly in her lap. He thought about Mia. He thought about the cough medicine, the CVS 3 blocks away, the empty apartment on the first floor of his building that his landlord kept saying he was going to rent, but never did. He thought about Sarah, and about the night in the hospital when everything had been wrong, and there'd been nothing he could do to fix it. He thought, "I can fix something tonight." "Come with me," he said. Hannah stared at him. "Excuse me?" I don't mean anything strange by that. I live 3 blocks from here. There's an empty apartment in my building, first floor, and the landlord hasn't rented it in 4 months. I know that because I'm the one who checks on the pipes." He stopped, started again. "You can stay there tonight. Just tonight. Until we figure out something better. You'll be warm, and I'll get you some food, and in the morning we can figure out what comes next." She was quiet for a long time. "You don't know me," she finally said. "No," Daniel agreed. "I don't." "I could be anyone." "So could I." He held her gaze. "But you've been sitting in the cold for 36 hours, and you asked me not to call anyone, and that means you're out of options. And I've got an empty apartment 3 blocks away." A pause. "I'm going to go to CVS and get medicine for my sick daughter. I'll be back in 15 minutes. If you're still here and you want to come, I'll take you. If you're gone when I get back, I understand." He straightened up, looked at her one more time. Then he turned and walked toward the CVS. He didn't look back. The CVS was nearly empty at that hour. A teenager on register, half asleep. Fluorescent lights that hummed slightly off-key. Daniel moved through the aisles on autopilot. Children's cough syrup, the good kind with the night formula. A box of tissues, one of those small foil packets of vapor rub that Mia hated, but that actually worked. He stood in line behind a man buying lottery tickets and tried to think clearly. What are you doing? He didn't have a great answer for that. He was a 41-year-old mechanic with a sick kid, a water bill he couldn't quite cover, and no margin for complications. He barely kept the pieces of his own life in place. He had no business bringing a stranger in a wheelchair, a stranger who was clearly in some kind of serious trouble, into his building. His landlord, Roy, was not what you'd call understanding. Roy was the kind of man who sent notices about welcome mats being left in the hallway. The apartment on the first floor wasn't Daniel's to offer. None of this made any sense. But 36 hours. He kept coming back to that. 36 hours. She had been sitting in that shelter, invisible, in a wheelchair, in October. And the whole city had just walked past. Every single person who'd come down Garfield Street between yesterday morning and 11:47 tonight had made the same choice. Not my problem. Not tonight. Keep moving. He thought about Mia asking him once, when she was 5, why some people slept outside. He'd given her some gentle, soft-edged answer about how things were complicated and how some people needed help. And she'd looked up at him with that particular Mia expression, the one that said she was paying closer attention than you thought. And she'd asked, "But why doesn't somebody help them?" He'd told her, "Sometimes somebody does, sweetheart." He'd meant to this comfort. He wondered now how many times he'd walked past the answer to that question himself. The cashier handed him his change. Daniel pocketed it, walked back out into the cold. She was still there. He saw the wheelchair from half a block away, the pale blur of her in the shelter, and something in his chest settled that he hadn't realized had been tense. He pushed the wheelchair himself. Hannah let him without protest, which told him more about how exhausted she was than anything she could have said. And they went the 3 blocks to his building, without much conversation. The cold made speech an effort neither of them wanted to make. At one point, on the corner of Garfield and Mills, a car slowed as it passed them, and Daniel saw the driver look, that quick, sideways look, evaluating, and then accelerate away. He'd been that driver once, probably. He couldn't remember a specific time, but he'd been that driver. The building was a 2-story walk-up from the 1970s, unremarkable, with exterior stairs and a parking lot that was slightly too small. The first-floor apartment was at the back, 1B, with a door that Daniel knew was unlocked, because Roy's handyman Pete kept forgetting to secure it after his maintenance checks. It was unlocked tonight. He pushed it open with his shoulder. "It's not much," Daniel said, and that was accurate. The apartment was empty in the way that vacant places get empty, not just without furniture, but without warmth, without the accumulated sediment of someone living in it. Just walls and windows and bare floors and the particular silence of a space that was waiting. "It has heat?" Hannah asked. "Yeah, the boiler's shared with the whole building." He found the thermostat in the dark, clicked it up. The baseboard heaters ticked and then slowly began to breathe. "Then it's fine," she said quietly. He went upstairs to check on Mia. Still asleep, still coughing slightly, the flush of low fever across her cheeks. And he measured out the cough syrup with the careful precision of a man who'd done it alone too many times. He pulled her blanket up, stood in her doorway for a moment. Then he went back downstairs. He brought what he had: a spare blanket from the closet shelf, the thick flannel one Sarah had bought at a church sale years ago, a bottle of water, half a loaf of bread, and the last of the peanut butter, which wasn't much, but was something. He knocked, waited, pushed the door open slowly. Hannah was in the middle of the empty room. She hadn't moved toward the wall or tried to settle. She was just there, in her chair, in the dark and the growing warmth, and she was crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, just that particular silent kind of crying. The kind you do when you've been holding everything together so long that the moment something gives, the release comes out whether you want it to or not. Daniel set everything down just inside the door. He didn't say anything. He knew, from experience, that there were moments when someone didn't need words. They just needed to know that another person was present, that they'd been seen. He sat down on the floor against the doorframe and waited. After a while, Hannah pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes, took a slow breath, let it out. "Sorry," she said. "Don't be." A silence. The heater ticked. "Why did you stop?" she asked. Not accusatory, genuinely curious, like it was a question she'd been turning over since the moment he'd first appeared out of the dark. Daniel leaned his head back against the doorframe. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I almost didn't." "But you did." "Yeah." Another silence. "I had a daughter," Hannah said. "Once." The words fell strange, and then she added quickly, "No, I mean, I do, somewhere. My sister has her. Since the accident. I wasn't able to." She stopped, started again. "I couldn't take care of her. I couldn't take care of myself." Daniel didn't respond immediately. He let the words be what they were. "How long ago?" he asked. "The accident was 16 months ago. A construction site. Scaffolding collapse." She said it the way people say things they've said too many times. The words worn smooth by repetition. All the roughness filed away. "I was a project coordinator. I wasn't even supposed to be on that floor. I was trying to track down a delivery that was late, and the scaffolding—" A pause. "It doesn't matter how it happened." "It matters," Daniel said. She looked at him. "Why?" "Because things don't happen for no reason, and how they happen is part of the story." Hannah was quiet for a long moment. The heater had stopped ticking and was now just breathing steadily, and the room was noticeably warmer than it had been 10 minutes ago. "They said it was my fault," she said finally. "The company. They said I was on a restricted area without authorization. Their insurance denied the claim. My lawyer, the one I could afford, said we could fight it, but that it would take years, and in the meantime, I had nothing." She paused. "My boyfriend, we'd been together 4 years. He stayed for about 6 weeks after the accident. Then he left. I don't blame him. Not completely. I wasn't easy to be around." "You'd just lost everything." "I'd lost everything," she agreed, flat, like a fact. "And the shelters wouldn't take a wheelchair." Her voice didn't change. No bitterness, no heat, just the recitation of facts. "The first 3 I tried weren't accessible. The 4th one technically was, but the accessible bathroom was out of service, and when I asked about it, the intake coordinator told me they'd had it for months and hadn't gotten around to it yet." A short exhale through her nose, not quite a laugh. "I stopped trying after that." Daniel looked at her across the dark room. "I'm going to tell you something," he said, "and I want you to take it the right way." Hannah waited. "I don't have a solution," he said. "I don't have a plan. I barely have the money to keep this apartment on the suggestion that it might need me to in an emergency, which is not even something I've actually checked with Roy, who is my landlord and who is not going to love this." He paused. "I have a sick 7-year-old upstairs, and a job that starts at 7 a.m., and a water bill I'm 3 weeks behind on. I am not equipped for this." Hannah was watching him steadily. "But you're here," she said. "But you're here," he agreed. "And it's warm. And tomorrow, we'll figure out the next step." He picked up the blanket from the floor where he'd set it and held it out to her. "Tonight, you don't have to figure out anything." She looked at the blanket for a moment. Then she reached out and took it. Daniel checked on Mia one more time before he went to bed. She was sleeping more easily now, the cough medicine doing its work, her breathing slower and more regular. He sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and just watched her, the way parents watch sleeping children, with that particular helpless tenderness that has no adequate name. "Dad?" Her voice was thick with sleep. "Yeah, baby, I'm here." "I heard the door." "I was just checking on something. Go back to sleep." "Is everything okay?" He thought about the woman in the empty apartment downstairs. He thought about 36 hours in the cold, and a scaffolding that had collapsed, and the company that had denied a claim, and a man who had left, and the system that had turned away a wheelchair at the door. "Yeah," he said, "everything's okay." Mia settled back into her pillow. Daniel sat with her a moment longer. Then he went to bed, and he stared at the ceiling, and he thought, "You have no idea what you just did." He was right about that. He had absolutely no idea. He woke up to the sound of his daughter's voice. Not the coughing, but the talking. The bright, animated talking that Mia did when something had caught her full attention. And he lay still for a moment, trying to place the other voice underneath it. Lower. Quieter. A woman's voice. He was on his feet and halfway down the stairs before he fully processed what was happening. The door to 1B was open. He stopped in the doorway. Mia was sitting cross-legged on the bare floor of the empty apartment, still in her pajamas, her hair a disaster, holding her stuffed bunny, the brown one with the floppy ear that she'd had since she was 2, and she was talking to Hannah with the complete, unself-conscious confidence of a child who has not yet learned to be suspicious of people. Hannah was in her wheelchair, wrapped in the flannel blanket, and she was listening to Mia with an expression that Daniel couldn't immediately read. Attentive, a little careful. And underneath that, something else. Something that looked like it cost her something to show. "And his name is Captain Hopscotch," Mia was explaining, holding up the bunny for inspection. "But sometimes I call him Hop because it's faster. He gets scared sometimes at night because of the thunder, so I sleep with him. Do you get scared at night?" A pause. "Sometimes," Hannah said. Mia considered this seriously. Then she held out the bunny. "You can borrow him," she said. "He helps. I know he looks like a bunny, but he's actually really brave when you need him to be." Daniel stood in the doorway and watched his daughter offer her most important possession to a stranger she'd known for approximately 4 minutes, and he felt something move through him that he couldn't have articulated if he'd had all day to try. Hannah took the bunny with both hands, carefully, like it was breakable. "Thank you," she said quietly, and her voice was different when she said it, different from the flat, careful recitation of facts from the night before. Rougher, more real. Mia beamed. Then she looked up and saw Daniel in the doorway. "Dad, I found the lady downstairs. She's nice, and she has a cool wheelchair." "I can see that," Daniel said. Hannah looked at him. "She knocked," she said. "I wasn't going to." "It's fine." He looked at his daughter. "Mia, let's let—" "Hannah," Mia supplied helpfully. "Let Hannah have some quiet time. And you need breakfast." "Can Hannah have breakfast too?" Mia asked. The question was completely without guile. It was simply a logical extension of the situation. There was a person. The person might be hungry. Breakfast solved hunger. Daniel looked at Hannah. Hannah opened her mouth. He could see the refusal forming, the practiced deflection of someone who'd learned to take up as little space as possible. And then she stopped, closed her mouth, looked at the bunny in her hands. "Okay," she said. "Yeah, that would be... Thank you." Mia's face broke into the kind of grin that only 7-year-olds can produce. Full body, incandescent, completely out of proportion to the occasion. "I'll help make it," she announced, and scrambled to her feet and ran for the stairs. Daniel stood in the doorway for a moment. Hannah looked at him. "You have a remarkable kid." "Yeah," he said. "I know." A pause. "She has her mother's instincts," he added. He hadn't meant to say that. It came out before he made the decision. He watched something shift in Hannah's face. A recognition, maybe, of what that sentence cost. And she nodded once. "She must have been someone," Hannah said. "She was," Daniel said. "Yeah, she was." He pushed off the doorframe and headed up to make scrambled eggs for 3. The scrambled eggs were nothing special. Daniel made them the way he always made them. Too much butter, not enough salt, slightly overdone on the edges because he always forgot to turn the heat down in time. Mia ate hers with ketchup, which she'd been doing since she was 4, and which Daniel had long since stopped fighting. Hannah ate hers quietly, methodically, with the focused attention of someone who hadn't had a hot meal in longer than she wanted to admit. Nobody talked much during the actual eating, but it wasn't uncomfortable silence. It was the particular quiet of people who are each, privately, recalibrating. Mia finished first. She wiped her mouth with her sleeve before Daniel could hand her a napkin. which was a battle he lost every single morning. And then she looked at Hannah with a direct, unfiltered curiosity that she aimed at everything that interested her. "Can I ask you something?" Mia said. Hannah looked up. "Sure." "Why do you use a wheelchair?" "Mia," Daniel started. "It's okay," Hannah said. She set her fork down, looked at Mia with that same careful attention she'd given her in the apartment below. "I was in an accident. At my job. It hurt my back in a way that means my legs don't work the way they used to." Mia absorbed this with a small nod, the way she absorbed most information. Seriously, without drama. "Does it hurt?" "Not the way you'd think," Hannah said. "It's more like, you know how when your foot falls asleep and there's that weird feeling that isn't really pain but isn't comfortable either?" "Yeah. It's kind of like that. Except it doesn't wake up." Mia looked at the wheelchair, then back at Hannah. "That seems hard." "It is sometimes," Hannah said. "Yeah. But you got used to it?" Hannah was quiet for a moment. "I'm still getting used to it." Mia accepted that with a small nod. Then she picked up Captain Hopscotch from the table, where she'd placed him next to her plate, and slid him across to Hannah's side. "He can stay with you a little longer," she announced. "He likes meeting new people." Daniel watched Hannah look down at the bunny and very deliberately not look up for a moment. When she did, her eyes were steady. She had control of whatever had almost moved across her face. "Thanks, Mia," she said. "I appreciate the company." The problem with Roy started on the 4th day. Daniel had known it was coming. He'd known it the way you know a storm is coming. You can see the shape of it from a distance. You can feel it in the air. And the only real question is how bad it gets when it finally arrives. Roy Castellano was 63 years old, owned 4 rental properties in Riverside, and had the particular energy of a man who had never been wrong about anything in his life and saw no reason to start now. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't malicious. He was just a man who had rules and believed that rules were rules because rules prevented chaos. And he'd built his small corner of the world around that belief, like a fortress. He knocked on Daniel's door on a Tuesday evening. Daniel knew before he opened it. "Evening, Roy." Roy was a stocky man with a gray mustache and the kind of hands that had done real work once and never forgotten it. He had a clipboard which he always carried when he was about to have a serious conversation. Daniel had never figured out if anything was actually written on the clipboard or if it was just a prop. "You want to tell me about 1B?" Roy said. "I was going to talk to you about that," Daniel said. "Were you?" It wasn't a question. Roy's eyes were flat and patient. "Because Pete told me the heat's been running down there, and the light under the door's been on at night." He paused. "And I saw the wheelchair on the ramp this morning." Daniel took a breath. "Her name is Hannah Blake. She's—" "I know who she is," Roy said. "I don't need her name. What I need is an explanation for why you're letting someone live in my apartment without my permission, without a lease, without—" She had nowhere to go. "That is not my problem, Daniel. She was at the bus stop on Garfield for 36 hours, in October, in a wheelchair." Roy's jaw moved slightly. He looked at the clipboard, looked back up. "I'm sorry about that. I am. But I have liability. I have insurance. If something happens to her in that apartment, if she gets hurt, if there's a problem—" "What kind of problem?" "Any kind." Roy's voice was firm, but not unkind. "I can't have unauthorized occupants. You know that. You've known that since you moved in." Daniel leaned against the door frame. "How long?" Roy looked at him. "Before you make it formal," Daniel said. "How long before I need to have her out?" Roy was quiet for a moment. He was a hard man, but Daniel had known him for 3 years. And hardness and cruelty were not the same thing, even if they sometimes looked alike from the outside. "End of the week," Roy said finally. "That's all I can do."
That's 5 days.
"That's 5 days more than most landlords would give you." Daniel nodded.
Okay.
Roy turned to go. Then he stopped, half turned back. "She eating okay? Down there?"
Yeah, Daniel said. She's eating.
Roy grunted, nodded once, walked away down the hall without another word. Daniel told Hannah that evening. He sat down at the small table in 1B. He'd dragged one of his own kitchen chairs down there, along with an extra lamp and a space heater from the hall closet, because the baseboard heat was adequate but not warm. And he told her straight. Hannah listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Her hands were folded in her lap. Then she said, "I knew this was temporary." "I know you did." "I've been thinking about it anyway." She looked at her hands. "There's a woman, a caseworker I had briefly after the accident, before everything fell apart. Maria Suarez. She was the only one in the whole system who actually seemed like she was trying. I've been thinking about calling her." "What stopped you?" Hannah looked at him. "Honestly?" "Yeah." "I was afraid she'd put me somewhere worse." A pause. "I know how that sounds." "It sounds like someone who's been through the system before." "It sounds like someone who stopped trusting people," she said. "Which is a different thing." Daniel nodded slowly. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "How long were you actually on the street? Before the bus stop, I mean. Before I found you." Hannah's expression didn't change exactly, but something behind it shifted. 7 weeks, she said. "More or less. 7 weeks." Daniel did the math on what that meant. What the logistics of 7 weeks in a wheelchair on the streets of Riverside actually looked like. The problem of food, of bathrooms, of staying safe, of staying dry. The sheer relentless exhaustion of it. And then he stopped doing the math, because it was making him angry in a way he didn't have a clean place to put. "You call Maria Suarez," he said, "and in the meantime, I'll talk to Roy again." Hannah frowned slightly. "You just said he gave you 5 days." "I said he gave me 5 days. I haven't talked to him about the actual situation yet. I told him your name and that you had nowhere to go. I didn't tell him everything." He paused. "Roy's harder than he looks, but he's not an indifferent man. There's a difference." Hannah looked at him for a long moment. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Not the way she'd asked it that first night. That had been genuine confusion, a question from someone trying to understand the rules of a situation they'd never been in before. This was something different. This was a question with weight behind it, with worry. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you have a kid. You have a job. You have a life that's already difficult, and you know that because you told me yourself that first night. You told me exactly what your situation was, and none of it leaves room for this." She gestured, a small, controlled movement that encompassed the lamp, the chair, the space heater, all of it. "So why?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. "My wife died 2 years ago," he said. "You know that." "You mentioned it." "For about 3 months after she died, I was not okay. Not in a way that I was telling people about, but in a way that was real. I was barely getting through the days, working, picking Mia up, making dinner, putting her to bed, doing it all again." He paused. "One night, this is going to sound small, but it wasn't. I was at the grocery store at 11 o'clock because I'd forgotten that we were out of milk, and Mia needed it for her cereal in the morning. And I was standing in the dairy aisle, and I just stopped. I couldn't make a decision. I couldn't pick up the carton. I just stood there in that aisle for I don't know how long, completely stuck. Hannah was listening. And this woman, older lady, maybe 70, I've never seen her before in my life, came down the aisle and she stopped next to me and she said, "Honey, are you okay?" Just like that, real simple. She could see that I wasn't, I guess. And I said I was fine, and she said, "You sure?" And I said I was sure. He paused again. She patted my arm, said, "I'm going to pray for you tonight." And she walked away. He looked at Hannah. That's it. That's the whole story. She didn't fix anything. She didn't solve a single problem. She just stopped and asked if I was okay. And she meant it, and she touched my arm. He was quiet for a moment. I went home and I cried for the first time since the funeral. Real crying, not the contained stuff I'd been doing. And in the morning, I made an appointment with the therapist. Hannah was still watching him. "I'm not saying I'm that old woman," Daniel said. "I'm not saying this is the same. I'm just saying someone stopped. Someone noticed. And it mattered in a way that I still can't fully explain." He looked at her directly. "You were at that bus stop for 36 hours, Hannah. In a city of 200,000 people. And I almost walked past, too." The silence in the small room was different from the silences before. Warmer somehow, or heavier. He wasn't sure which. "I'm going to call Maria tomorrow," Hannah said finally. "Good. And I'm going to figure out what's next. I'm not going to let this become... I don't want to be a problem for you." "You're not a problem. I could become one." "So could I," Daniel said. "So could Mia, for that matter. She broke a window last spring playing with a baseball in the parking lot, and I told Roy a bird flew into it." He said it completely straight-faced. Hannah looked at him for a half-second, then made a sound that might have been, almost, a laugh. Small, brief, but real. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh, even that small version of it. He filed it away somewhere. The conversation with Roy happened the next morning, before the sun was fully up, in the building's parking lot, where Roy was always visible at 6 a.m., checking something or other about the property that Daniel had never fully understood. "I need 10 more minutes of your time," Daniel said. Roy looked at him. "I said end of the week." "I know what you said. I need 10 minutes." Roy looked at his watch, then at Daniel. "Fine." So Daniel told him. All of it. The construction accident, the company's denial, the boyfriend who'd left, the shelters that had turned her away at the door, the 7 weeks on the street, the 36 hours at the bus stop. Roy listened with the focused expression of a man who has learned to evaluate situations quickly and doesn't like wasting time on things that aren't going to change his mind. His jaw moved slightly once, which Daniel had learned was what Roy did instead of showing emotion. When Daniel finished, there was a silence. "The shelters turned her away because of the wheelchair," Roy said, not a question. "Couldn't accommodate her." Roy looked at the building. 1B has the accessible bathroom. "Yeah, I know." "Wider door frames." "I noticed." Roy was quiet for a moment. He looked at his clipboard. He looked at Daniel. "I'm still going to need something official. I can't just have an unauthorized occupant indefinitely. Insurance purposes alone." "I understand." "She'd need to be on some kind of official documentation with the apartment." "What kind of documentation?" Roy looked at him with an expression that was difficult to read exactly. Somewhere between exasperation and something more complicated. "There are options," he said carefully. "Sublease. Official tenant. Or..." He stopped. "Or what?" Roy looked at the building again. "I'm not in the business of giving legal advice, Daniel. I'm just telling you there are options." He tucked his clipboard under his arm. "End of the week. I need something official, or she can't stay. That's the bottom line." He walked back toward the building. Maria Suarez called back the same afternoon. Hannah was in the apartment when it happened, and she told Daniel about it that evening when he knocked on the door after his shift. He came, still in his work clothes, carrying a paper bag with 2 sandwiches from the place on Monroe that he'd stopped at on the way home. He was learning, without having made a deliberate decision about it, that Hannah ate better when the food arrived matter-of-factly, without ceremony, as if it were simply a thing that was happening and not a kindness that required acknowledgement. "She remembered me," Hannah said. There was something in her voice that she was working to keep neutral. "She actually remembered me. I'd only worked with her for maybe 3 weeks before my case got transferred. But she remembered." "What did she say?" Hannah turned the phone over in her hands. "She said she'd been worried about me, that when the case got transferred, she'd tried to follow up, but lost the thread." A pause. "She said there are new programs, HUD-funded, accessible housing initiatives that weren't available 16 months ago. She wants to meet with me." She set the phone on her knee. She sounded like she meant it. "She probably does." "I know," Hannah said. "That's—" She stopped. "That's what?" Daniel asked. "That's harder to deal with than I expected," she admitted. "When nobody means it, you know where you stand. When someone actually means it, you have to—" She made a small gesture. "You have to let it in. And that's scary," Daniel said. She looked at him. "Yeah." He handed her one of the sandwiches. She took it. Outside, a car moved through the parking lot, its headlights sweeping briefly across the window. "Roy talked to me this morning," Daniel said. He'd been deciding how to bring this up all day, and he'd eventually determined that the only method that made any sense was straight. "About me. About the apartment. About documentation." He paused. "He said he needs something official or you can't stay past the end of the week. A sublease or official tenancy." He stopped, chose his next words carefully. "He also said there were other options. He didn't specify. I think he was being deliberately vague." Hannah was quiet for a moment. "What kind of other options?" "I don't fully know," Daniel said honestly. "I've been thinking about it all day. And I don't have a clean answer. I know that the simplest official documentation that would cover both the housing question and the benefits question, the disability support you get is tied to your housing status, right?" Hannah nodded slowly. "If I'm classified as having stable housing, certain benefits recalculate. If I'm living in a registered household with someone, it changes the equation for some of the assistance programs." She looked at him carefully. "What are you saying, Daniel?" "I'm not saying anything yet," he said. "I'm thinking out loud." "Think less out loud and more directly." He looked at her. "The most stable solution, legally, for the housing, for your benefits, would be if you were a formal member of this household." He paused. "Which has a lot of different meanings, depending on how you structure it." Hannah looked at him for a long time. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but it had a quality to it. The particular density of 2 people sitting very close to a large thing without quite naming it yet. "That would be insane," she said finally. "Probably," Daniel agreed. "We've known each other for 5 days. 4.5. That doesn't help your case." "I know." Hannah looked down at the sandwich in her hands, then back up at him. "Is that something you would actually consider? Legitimately? Or are you just—" "I don't do things I don't mean," Daniel said quietly. "Ask Roy. Ask anyone who knows me. I'm a lot of things, but I don't say things I don't mean." She held his gaze. Her eyes were doing that thing again, that direct measuring quality, the intelligence behind the exhaustion, the caution that had been earned rather than assumed. "Let me meet with Maria first," she said. "Let me see what the options actually are, what the programs actually cover." She paused. "And then we'll talk. Legitimately." That's fair, Daniel said. It's also completely irrational that this is a conversation we're having. Most of the important things are, Daniel said. Hannah looked at him for another moment. Then she looked down at her sandwich and took a deliberate bite, which he understood was her way of closing the subject for the evening without closing it entirely. Mia found out on a Thursday. She hadn't been told anything specific. Daniel had simply let things be what they were, which was a strategy he developed with Mia because she had a remarkable instinct for detecting when she was being managed, and she resented it deeply. She was 7, but she was a specific and particular kind of 7 that had everything to do with being raised by 2 people who'd talked to her like a person from the very beginning, and then by 1 person who'd continued that practice because it was the only parenting approach he actually knew. She came home from school on Thursday, dropped her backpack by the door, and immediately went to knock on the door of one B. Daniel, who was starting dinner, heard the knock, and then heard the door open, and then heard Mia's voice at full volume. "Hannah, I finished the book. The one with the horse. It was so good. The horse doesn't die, by the way, which my friend Kelsey told me it did, but Kelsey was wrong." Then Hannah's voice, quieter. "Kelsey sounds unreliable." "She really is," Mia said solemnly. Daniel turned the heat down under the pasta and leaned against the kitchen counter and just listened to his daughter's voice, floating up through the floor, animated and unguarded and completely herself, talking to the woman in the apartment below about a horse book and an unreliable classmate named Kelsey. He'd been carrying a specific kind of loneliness since Sarah died. Not just his own, but Mia's. The loneliness of a child who had lost the particular quality of warmth that a mother provides. That specific frequency of attention and care that a father, no matter how hard he tried, couldn't fully replicate. He'd tried. He tried every single day. But there were moments, small moments, quiet moments, when he could see the shape of what was missing in his daughter's life. And it was a shape he didn't know how to fill. He listened to her talking through the floor and thought, I don't know what any of this becomes. But this particular thing, right now, tonight, is good. The meeting with Maria Suarez happened on a Friday afternoon. Daniel drove Hannah to the county services building on Arrow Highway, which had accessible parking and a ramp that actually functioned, and he waited in the car while Hannah went in. He told himself he was going to listen to the radio, or maybe close his eyes for 15 minutes. What he actually did was sit in the driver's seat and think. He thought about Roy's careful non-statement about other options. He thought about the disability benefit recalculations Hannah had mentioned. He thought about Mia's voice through the floor and Captain Hopscotch and scrambled eggs, and a woman who had spent 7 weeks on the street because every system that was supposed to catch her had failed. He thought about Sarah, but differently than he usually did. Not with grief, exactly. More with a specific, strange sensation of trying to figure out what she would say about all of this. Sarah had been a practical woman. She'd believed in doing the thing that needed doing and figuring out the paperwork later. She'd have had a clear opinion about this. He was fairly sure he knew what it would have been. Hannah was inside for an hour and 20 minutes. When she came back out, she was moving her wheelchair herself, which she always did when she had something to process. She'd explained once that the physical act of propelling herself gave her brain something to do while the rest of her worked through whatever needed working through. She came to the passenger side of the car. Daniel leaned over and opened the window. "Well?" he said. Hannah looked at him. Her expression was complicated. Not happy exactly, not relieved exactly, but something that sat adjacent to both of those things and also included something else, something more fragile. "There are programs," she said. "Real ones. Housing assistance, case management, vocational rehabilitation. Maria already flagged 3 properties that are fully accessible and within the assistance budget. She paused. It would take time. A few months, probably. The wait lists are... A few months is okay, Daniel said. But in the meantime, my benefit situation is complicated. She paused again, and he could see her choosing her words. If I'm classified as having established housing, a real address, a registered household, several of the transitional benefits I'm currently technically eligible for become accessible. Benefits that are currently blocked because I don't have a stable address. She looked at him directly. The math is, it changes things considerably. For me. And the documentation Roy needs, Hannah, would solve both problems at once if... Hannah. He said it quietly but firmly. Stop building the case. I'm not a landlord you're trying to convince. Just tell me what you're thinking. She stopped. The practiced argument dissolved. I'm thinking, she said slowly, that the most rational next step, for the housing, for the benefits, for Mia, for all of it, is the thing we didn't quite name the other night. Daniel looked at her. And I'm also thinking, she continued, that rational reasons and real reasons are different things. And I need you to know the difference before we go any further. Because I've made decisions based on rational reasons before and had them fall apart. She held his gaze. So I need to ask you straight. Okay, Daniel said. Is this, whatever this would be, something you're doing because it solves a problem? Or is it something you're doing because you actually... She stopped. Started again. Because you actually think there's something worth building here. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He looked at his hands on the steering wheel. He looked at the building across the parking lot. He looked back at Hannah. Both, he said honestly. And I think that might be the most real answer I can give you right now. I think it solves a real problem. And I think... He paused. I think you're someone I want to know better. I think Mia is already... You've already become something to her. I think that matters. He paused again. And I think I'm not going to pretend I have it all figured out, because I don't. Nobody does. But I don't think it has to be figured out to be worth doing. Hannah looked at him for a long time. The afternoon light came through the windshield and made everything very clear. The parking lot, the building, the chair, the two of them. Okay, she said finally. The word was quiet, but it wasn't uncertain. It had the quality of something decided. Okay, Daniel said. He got out of the car. He unfolded the ramp from the back, and they drove home. Back to the building on Mill Street. Back to the apartment where Mia was waiting with her homework and her questions, and the particular brilliant noise of her presence. And neither of them said much more. But the silence between them on that drive home was different from the silence that had existed before. It had a future in it now. And that was new. The paperwork took 11 days. Maria Suarez had a contact at the county clerk's office, a woman named Dolores, who had apparently been processing emergency documentation for 22 years and who moved through bureaucratic red tape the way a good mechanic moves through a difficult engine. Efficiently, without sentiment, with complete confidence in what each part was supposed to do. Daniel and Hannah sat across from Dolores on a Tuesday morning in a room that smelled like recycled air and old carpet, and they answered questions and signed things and initialed things. And at a certain point, Dolores looked up over her reading glasses and said, "You understand what you're filing, correct?" And Daniel said yes, and Hannah said yes, and Dolores made a small sound that might have been approval and went back to the paperwork. Roy had been told. He'd stood at his front door with a clipboard under his arm and listened to Daniel explain the situation in full. The plan, the documentation, the timeline, what it meant for the tenancy of 1B. And when Daniel finished, Roy had looked at him for a long, measured moment and said, "You're sure about this?" "No," Daniel had said honestly. Roy had nodded, slowly, as if that were the correct answer. "Nobody's ever sure," he said. "People who are sure are usually wrong." He'd tapped the clipboard against his palm once. "Get me the paperwork when it's done." That had been that. What Daniel hadn't entirely anticipated was how Mia would take the news. He'd sat her down on the Sunday evening after dinner, at the kitchen table, with the remains of her macaroni still in the bowl in front of her, and he'd tried to explain it in terms that were honest without being complicated, which was harder than it sounded. "Hannah's going to be staying with us," he said. "Not just in the apartment downstairs, here, with us." Mia had looked at him with those eyes that always made him feel like he was being evaluated by someone much older than 7. "Like family?" she asked. "Yeah," Daniel said. "Like family." "Like, is she going to be my mom?" Daniel had prepared himself for a lot of possible responses. Not that one exactly. Not with that directness and that complete lack of guile. He felt something move in his chest that he wasn't sure how to categorize. "She's going to be part of our family," he said carefully. "What that looks like exactly, we'll figure out together. All 3 of us." Mia had considered this for a moment, her spoon turning slowly in the macaroni bowl. "Does Hannah know?" she asked. "Yes, we talked about it." "What did she say?" "She said yes." Mia nodded once, with the gravity of a judge handing down a considered verdict. "Good," she said. "Because I already told Kelsey about her, and Kelsey said it sounded cool." Daniel had stared at his daughter for a full 3 seconds. "You already told Kelsey?" "Just that there was a lady living downstairs who was nice and had a wheelchair," Mia said, completely unconcerned. "I didn't say the other stuff because I didn't know the other stuff yet." She picked up her spoon. "Can I be excused? I want to go tell Hannah." He'd let her go. He'd sat at the kitchen table alone for a moment, with the particular silence of a man whose daughter had just handled something better than he had. The first weeks of the new arrangement were awkward in the specific way that 2 people sharing a life they haven't rehearsed together are always awkward. Not badly awkward. Not painfully awkward, just the constant low hum of 2 adults navigating the 1,000 small negotiations that domesticity requires. Who uses the kitchen when? Whose routine's been for whose? What the rules are for noise and space, and the particular texture of evenings. Hannah moved into the 2nd bedroom, which required some reorganization. The room had been functioning as a combination of storage space and the kind of informal junk repository that accumulates in any home where one person is doing the work of 2. Daniel cleared it out on a Saturday, while Mia handed him boxes and provided a running commentary on what should be kept and what should be thrown away that was largely helpful and occasionally completely off base. "Dad, you should keep this," Mia said, holding up a ceramic mug with a chip in the handle that had been at the bottom of a box since God knows when. "That's broken, Mia." "It still holds stuff." "It's got a chip that drips every time you use it." "Then it holds most stuff." He kept the mug. He wasn't entirely sure why. Hannah watched the process from the doorway, and when Daniel and Mia were finished and the room was clear, she rolled in slowly and looked around. She didn't say anything for a moment, just looked. Then she turned to Daniel and said, very quietly, "Thank you." "Don't thank me for a room with no furniture." "I'm not thanking you for the room." He understood what she meant. He didn't push it. The furniture question resolved itself gradually. A bed frame that Daniel's co-worker Marcus was throwing out. A dresser that Maria Suarez somehow produced from a donations warehouse connected to the county services office. A small bookshelf that Mia insisted on contributing from her own room because she decided she liked keeping her books in stacks on the floor anyway. The room came together piece by piece, the way lives come together, not by design, but by accumulation. The hard part started about 6 weeks in. Not hard in the way of conflict or argument, or the kind of dramatic collision that makes for a clean narrative. Hard in the quieter way, the grinding, persistent way of things that are genuinely difficult, pretending not to be. Daniel's finances were the first pressure point. He'd always been precise about money. Not because he was naturally organized, but because single parenthood with a modest income left no room for imprecision. He knew his numbers the way a sailor knows weather signs, by feel, by long practice, by the particular anxiety that lives in the back of your mind when you understand that the margin between okay and not okay is narrower than most people you know would believe. Hannah's benefits had improved with the housing documentation, as Maria had promised they would. There were programs covering some of her medical and mobility costs, and she had a modest monthly support payment that she contributed directly to the household expenses without being asked to. But Hannah had also quietly observed, in the first weeks, that the water bill was overdue, that Daniel ate lunch at work instead of coming home because buying from the vending machine was cheaper than using the gas to drive back, and that the brown canvas jacket with the frayed left cuff was the only coat he owned. She brought it up one night after Mia was asleep. "I want to talk about the money," she said. Daniel looked up from the table where he'd been doing the math he did every month. The real math, not the optimistic version. "It's fine," he said, which was something he said often, and which was a statement of aspiration rather than fact. "No, it isn't," Hannah said. "And I'm not saying that as a criticism. I'm saying it because I've been living in this house for 6 weeks, and I have eyes." "Hannah, I'm contributing to the utilities and the grocery line," she said. "I know, but that's not enough, and you're compensating in ways you think I don't notice." She looked at him steadily. "The jacket, Daniel, it's November." "The jacket's fine." "The jacket has a hole in the left sleeve that you patched with electrical tape." He looked down. He'd forgotten about that. "I'm not trying to make this uncomfortable," Hannah said. "I'm trying to have an actual conversation about what this household actually needs, because that's what people who actually live together do." She paused. "So tell me the real number, not the fine number, the real one." He told her the real number. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Okay, here's what I can contribute starting next month, and here's what I think we should cut. And here's one thing I want to suggest that you might push back on, but I need you to actually consider." She talked for about 10 minutes. The thing she needed him to actually consider was using some of her vocational rehabilitation funds, which she was in the process of applying for through Maria's office, to take an online course in auto shop management, which would potentially qualify Daniel for the shop manager position that Gary had mentioned once and never formally offered. "I don't know if Gary's actually going to offer that position," Daniel said. "Have you asked?" A pause. "No." "Then ask," Hannah said simply. "Tomorrow." He asked Gary the next morning. Gary, who was a laconic man of very few words, who expressed approval almost exclusively through the assignment of better tasks, looked at Daniel for a moment across the hood of the car they were both working on and said, "I've been waiting for you to bring that up for 8 months. Yeah, we'll talk about it." Daniel came home and told Hannah. She nodded, as if this were the expected outcome, which irritated him slightly and also made him want to laugh. "You're very confident," he said. "I'm good at reading situations," she said. "I was a project coordinator. It was literally my job." The incident with the caseworker happened on a Wednesday in December, which Daniel would remember for the rest of his life, because it was the day that everything almost came apart. Her name was Linda Pierce, and she was not Maria Suarez. She was the new case manager who had taken over Hannah's file when Maria's caseload had been redistributed following a departmental restructuring, which, in Daniel's observation, was government language for, "We cut staff, and now everyone has too much work." Linda Pierce was not unkind. She was efficient and procedural, and she believed in the rules because the rules were, in her experience, the most reliable tools she had. She arrived at 3 in the afternoon without an appointment, which was within her technical authority, but which felt, to both Daniel and Hannah, like a deliberate choice. Hannah was alone in the apartment when Linda knocked. Daniel was at work. Mia was at school. Linda came in, assessed the space with the practiced eye of someone who has evaluated living situations for many years, and began asking questions. She was thorough. She asked about the nature of Daniel and Hannah's relationship, about the timeline of the living arrangement, about the marriage documentation, about Hannah's daily care routine, and who provided assistance and under what formal arrangement. Hannah answered everything directly. She had learned, over 16 months of navigating systems, that the most effective approach with administrative authority was calm, complete transparency. That anything that looked like evasion, even innocent evasion, became a larger problem than the thing you were trying to avoid. But Linda Pierce had done this for a long time, and she was asking specific questions about the nature of the household arrangement in a way that had a specific purpose behind it. "Ms. Blake," she said at a certain point, "I want to be direct with you. The documentation supporting your current benefit structure is based on a registered household, a formal family unit." She paused. "It's come to our attention that the timeline of this arrangement may be compressed, and there are questions about whether the household represents a genuinely established domestic situation, or whether the documentation may have been structured primarily to support benefit access." Hannah looked at her. "Are you asking if my marriage is real?" Linda Pierce held her gaze. "I'm asking if the household is genuine." "Yes," Hannah said, "it is." "I'd like to speak with your husband." "He's at work. He gets home at 5:30. Linda looked at her watch. Then she looked at Hannah. "I'll wait," she said. Daniel came home at 5:32 to find a county caseworker sitting in his kitchen. He'd been told about it by text. Hannah had sent a single, carefully worded message. "County caseworker here. Name is Linda Pierce. Waiting for you. Stay calm." He'd read it at a red light on Monroe and felt his stomach drop, and then, by a deliberate act of will, leveled himself out. He'd parked. He'd walked in steadily. Linda Pierce stood up when he came through the door, extended a hand. "Mr. Reeves, thank you for your time." "Of course." He shook her hand, looked at Hannah, who looked back at him with an expression that was outwardly composed, and underneath that composure was holding something very tightly together. "I've been speaking with your wife about the nature of your household arrangement," Linda said. "I have a few questions for you as well, if you don't mind." "Go ahead," Daniel said. She asked him about the timeline. He told the truth, the exact truth, because there was no version of the truth that he was ashamed of, and he decided, standing in the parking lot for 30 seconds before he came through the door, that the only way through this was straight. He told her about the bus stop. He told her about the apartment downstairs, and about Roy, and about the conversation where the options became clear. He told her about Mia and Captain Hopscotch and scrambled eggs and the 11 days of paperwork. He told her the marriage had been a practical decision made quickly. And then he said, "But I want to be precise about what I mean by that. Practical doesn't mean false. It means we were two people in a situation that required a decision, and we made one, and we meant it. Both of us." He looked at Linda directly. "I'm not going to sit here and tell you we were in love the day we signed the paperwork. That would be a lie. But I can tell you that we are a household, a real one.
And if you want to evaluate that, you're welcome to. Talk to my daughter. Talk to my landlord. Talk to my coworker Marcus, who helped us move the bed frame. He paused. Talk to anyone. Linda Pierce looked at him for a long moment. She looked at Hannah. She made a note on her clipboard. "I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Reeves," she said. Her voice was neither warm nor cold. "I'm going to be honest with you in return. Arrangements like this, practical arrangements, documented quickly, with benefit implications, they get reviewed. It's standard procedure. It doesn't imply bad faith. It's just policy." "I understand," Daniel said. "The review will look at the household over the next 60 days. Regular check-ins. Standard protocol." She capped her pen. "If the household is what you say it is, there won't be any issue." She left at 6:15. Daniel and Hannah sat in the kitchen after she left, and didn't speak for a moment. Mia was in her room, doing homework, unaware. The sound of her moving around up there was normal and grounding. "She's going to come back," Hannah said. "I know. Multiple times. For 60 days. "Yeah." Hannah looked at her hands on the kitchen table. If they decide it doesn't qualify, I lose the benefit recalculations. I'd be back to the baseline, which means—" "I know what it means." "Daniel." She looked up. Her voice was controlled, but there was something underneath the control that wasn't quite steady. "I need you to understand that if this falls apart, the review, the benefits, I have a backup plan. I've been building one with Maria. There are other options. I'm not—" She stopped. "I'm not a situation you have to manage. I am not going to let you carry something that breaks you." He looked at her. "I know you're not," he said. "I also know that you're sitting there right now, trying to give me an exit in case I want one. Because that's what you do. You build the exit before the other person feels trapped. Because that's what every other person in your life has used. So you put it there first." He paused. "I don't want the exit, Hannah." She was quiet. "I want to get through the 60 days, he said. "And I want to figure out what comes next. Together." He paused. "Is that okay?" A long silence. Then, "Yeah," she said. "That's okay." The 60 days were not easy. Linda Pierce came back twice in December and once in January. Each visit was formal and thorough and had the particular quality of an examination. Not hostile, but attentive in the way that felt like being watched. She spoke with Mia once, with the gentle but practiced directness that experienced caseworkers use with children, and Mia, being Mia, had apparently told her, among other things, that Hannah had helped her with a book report about the American Revolution, that Hannah made better grilled cheese than her dad because she didn't burn the edges, and that Hannah sometimes had nightmares, but that Captain Hopscotch was helping. Linda had written something down at that last part. The grilled cheese detail came out at dinner the same evening. Daniel looked at Hannah across the table. "You don't burn the edges?" "I turn the heat down at the right time," Hannah said evenly. "I've been making grilled cheese for 7 years." "Mm-hmm." Mia looked between them with the alert satisfaction of a person who has successfully introduced interesting information into a conversation. "It's really good grilled cheese, Dad," she said generously. "Thank you, Mia." "Yours is also good." "Thank you, Mia." "Just different." "Thank you, Mia." It was the kind of exchange that sounds like nothing when you describe it afterward, but which had a particular quality in the moment. Lightness, ease, the specific comfort of people who have started, without announcing it, to become fluent in each other. Daniel noticed it at the time and filed it away. He was getting better at filing things away rather than examining them too closely before they were ready. The conversation that changed something happened on a January night, late, after Mia was in bed and the house was quiet. Daniel had been awake later than usual, working through the numbers for the month. The calculations were easier now that he'd formally moved into the shop manager role, which Gary had made official in December, with a quiet handshake and a salary increase that wasn't dramatic, but was real. And Hannah had come out of her room because she couldn't sleep, which happened a few nights a week. She told him early on that the nightmares had been bad since the accident, and that they've gotten somewhat better since she'd been in the house, but hadn't gone away. She came to the kitchen and made tea, which was what she did when she couldn't sleep. Daniel looked up from the papers. "How bad tonight?" he asked. "Medium," she said. "Not the worst kind." He nodded. She settled at the table across from him, her hands wrapped around the mug. They'd had this kind of late-night kitchen conversation enough times now that it had its own particular quality. Quieter than daytime conversation. More direct, the way talk gets when you're tired and the normal social scaffolding has come down. "Can I ask you something?" Hannah said. "Yeah." "What do you actually think about all of this?" He looked up. "All of what?" "This." She made the same small gesture she sometimes made, encompassing the room, the house, the arrangement. Not the practical answer, not the "it makes sense" answer. She held his gaze. The real one. Daniel set down his pen. He thought for a moment. "I think," he said slowly, "that I have been surviving for 2 years. I've been good at it. I've kept Mia fed and healthy and happy, and I've kept the bills mostly paid, and I've gotten up every day and done the thing that needed doing." He paused. "And I think that surviving and living are different things. And I know, that there's been a difference in this house since you've been in it. And not just for Mia." He looked at her directly. "For me." Hannah was quiet for a moment. "I'm angry a lot," she said. "You should know that. I manage it. I think I manage it reasonably well. But it's there. At the company, at the system, at Marcus from your job who said something slightly condescending about the wheelchair when he came to help with the bed frame. I noticed that." "I know you noticed. You gave him a very specific look." "He deserved the look." "He did." A small pause. "I'm not easy," she said. "I want to be clear-eyed about that. I have a lot of—" She gestured at herself. "There's a lot to manage. The physical logistics, the appointments, the ongoing legal situation with the company that is still unresolved, the nightmares, the—" She stopped. "I have a daughter I haven't seen in 8 months because I've been too ashamed to ask my sister if I can visit. I have—" She stopped again. Her jaw tightened. "I have a lot." "I know," Daniel said. "And you signed up for it anyway." "I stopped at the bus stop," he said. "Everything after that was just the next step." She looked at him. In the quiet of the kitchen, in the particular honesty of 2 o'clock in the morning, something shifted between them. Not dramatically, not with any announcement, but the way a river shifts its course. Slowly, and then permanently. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay what?" "Okay." She looked at him with eyes that were, for the first time since he'd known her, not guarded or careful or measuring, just present. "I've been waiting for the thing that makes me trust this," she said. "And I think—" She stopped. "I think I'm done waiting for it. I think it's already here, and I've been not looking at it directly." Daniel didn't say anything. He held her gaze. "So I'm looking at it now," Hannah said. "That's all. I'm looking at it." He nodded slowly. "Good," he said. "Me too." The tea cooled between her hands. Outside, something moved across the parking lot. A car, or the wind, or some ordinary thing of no consequence. Inside the kitchen, two people who had arrived at each other by the most improbable route imaginable sat at a table in the middle of the night and let something real begin. Not with a gesture, not with words beyond the ones already spoken, just with the quiet decision to stop treating what was already present like something that might not last. Linda Pierce's final report came on a Friday in February. She delivered it in person, which was unusual, and which made Daniel's stomach do the thing it had been doing periodically for 60 days. She sat at the kitchen table, the same chair she'd used the first time, and she opened her folder and she looked at both of them. "The review is complete," she said. "The household has been assessed as a genuine domestic arrangement. Benefits remain intact. No further review is scheduled." She closed the folder. "The assessment notes," she added, in a tone that was still professional, but had acquired a very slight human warmth, that the household demonstrated significant stability, and that— she paused, looked at her notes— that the minor child described the household as good because everyone tries. She looked up. "I thought you'd want to know that." Daniel looked at Hannah. Hannah looked at Daniel. "That's Mia," Daniel said. "Yes," Linda Pierce said. "I gathered." She shook both their hands and left, and this time she didn't come back. Mia came home from school an hour later and dropped her backpack and looked at the two of them standing in the kitchen with expressions that must have communicated something, because she stopped in the doorway and looked back and forth between them. "What happened?" she asked. "Everything's okay," Daniel said. "Everything's actually okay." Mia considered this for a moment. Then she nodded with the simple acceptance of a child who has decided to take good news at face value. "Cool," she said. "Can we have Hannah's grilled cheese for dinner?" Hannah made a sound that was fully, completely a laugh this time, real and unguarded and warm. Daniel filed it away. He knew, standing there in that kitchen on that ordinary February afternoon, that this was a moment he would carry for the rest of his life. Not because anything dramatic had happened, not because the story had reached its conclusion. It hadn't, not remotely. There were years ahead that neither of them could see yet. Years that would ask more of both of them than they currently understood. But because a family that had started from nothing, from a bus stop, from a split-second decision in the cold, from 3 words spoken into the dark, was standing in a kitchen on a Friday afternoon, and a little girl was asking about grilled cheese, and for the first time in longer than he could clearly remember, all 3 of them were home. The legal case against Meridian Construction had been sitting in a file folder on Hannah's nightstand for 14 months before she opened it again. She'd told Daniel about it early on, the basic outline, the denied claim, the lawyer who'd said it would take years. But she hadn't told him all of it. She hadn't told him about the specific language in the denial letter, the way the company's legal team had characterized her presence on the restricted floor as reckless and unsanctioned, the way they had built a paper record retroactively that positioned her not as a victim of a structural failure, but as an employee who had violated safety protocols. She hadn't told him because in the early months of everything, she hadn't had the strength to revisit it. And later, because she'd gotten used to not revisiting it, which was a different thing, but produced the same outcome. She opened the folder on a Sunday in March because Mia had asked her a question at breakfast that she hadn't been able to answer. Mia had been working on a school project about fairness, a social studies unit, the kind that 7-year-olds approach with complete moral seriousness. And she'd been asking Hannah questions about her job before the accident, the way she sometimes asked Hannah questions about her life before, with a particular directness that Daniel had clearly passed down genetically. "Did your job know it was dangerous?" Mia asked.
The part that fell. Hannah had looked at her.
Yes, she said. They knew.
Did they fix it?
No.
Mia had processed this for a moment, her spoon tracing a slow circle in her cereal.
Then why didn't you get in trouble? She asked.
And then, immediately,
I mean, why didn't they get in trouble?
Hannah had said something gentle and non-committal about how these things were complicated. And Mia had nodded and moved on to the next question on her project worksheet. And the conversation had ended. But the question had stayed. Why didn't they get in trouble? It was, stripped to its simplest form, the only question that had mattered for 14 months. And the answer, the real answer, the full answer, was sitting in the file folder on her nightstand. She called Maria Suarez on Monday morning. "I need a referral," she said. "A real one, not the $200 consultation kind." Maria was quiet for a moment. "For the Meridian case?" "Yes."
"Hannah,"
Maria's voice was careful.
"it's been over a year. The statute of
"Is still live," Hannah said. "I checked. California personal injury statute is 2 years from the date of injury. I'm inside it. But just inside it." Another pause.
"You've been researching."
"I had a lot of time this weekend."
"Okay," Maria said. "Give me 2 days."
The name Maria came back with was a woman named Patricia Cho, who worked at a firm that specialized in workplace injury and disability discrimination, and who had, according to Maria, a specific and notable history with construction company defendants. Patricia Cho agreed to a phone consultation without a fee because Maria had apparently called in something she was owed, which Daniel said sounded like something from a television show, and Hannah said was just how systems actually worked when you knew which threads to pull. The call lasted 45 minutes. Patricia Cho asked precise, rapid questions in the manner of someone who evaluates cases the way Daniel evaluated engines, by listening for what didn't sound right rather than what did. She asked about the scaffolding inspection records, about the delivery Hannah had been tracking that day, about whether Hannah had sent any emails or messages documenting her location and purpose at the time of the accident.
"I sent a message to my site supervisor," Hannah said, "telling him I was going up to track the delivery. He read it. I have the receipt."
Patricia Cho was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "You have a read receipt on that message?"
"Yes."
"And the supervisor's name is on the company's organizational chart from that period?"
"He was the site supervisor, yes."
"Hannah," Patricia Cho's voice changed, not dramatically, but the way a room changes when the light shifts. "I want to look at your full file. I'm not making any promises, but I want to see what we're working with." Hannah set the phone down after the call ended and sat very still for a moment. Then she rolled to the kitchen where Daniel was eating lunch before his afternoon shift. "I have a lawyer," she said. He looked up. "A real one?"
"A real one."
He put down his sandwich. "Tell me." She told him. All of it. The call, Patricia Cho, the message with a read receipt, the statute of limitations window. She told him the parts she hadn't told him before. The company's retroactive paper record, the specific language of the denial letter, the full shape of what Meridian Construction had done. She'd been carrying it for a long time alone, and putting it into words to someone who was actually listening, who was leaning forward slightly, forearms on the table, face completely attentive, had a physical quality to it, like setting down something heavy. When she finished, Daniel was quiet for a moment. "The read receipt," he said. "That's the whole thing, isn't it?" "Patricia thinks it might be. It proves I had authorization. Or at least, it proves my supervisor knew exactly where I was and didn't tell me to come back down.
which undercuts the whole unauthorized access argument. Daniel looked at her steadily. Why didn't you tell me this before? Which part? Any of it. All of it. His voice wasn't accusatory, it was genuine. The denial letter, the way they characterized it.
You've been carrying that since before we met. Hannah held his gaze. Because it was mine to carry, she said, and I wasn't ready to share the weight of it yet. He nodded slowly. Are you ready now? I sent Patricia the full file this morning, she said. So yeah, I think so. The lawsuit was filed in April. The response from Meridian's legal team arrived 30 days later. Thorough, aggressive, and constructed with the kind of expensive precision that corporate defense firms produce when they are motivated. Patricia Cho had warned Hannah this was coming. They're going to make it unpleasant, she'd said, in the flat tone of someone who had sat across from those same firms many times. They're going to try to make you feel like you're the one who did something wrong. They're going to dig into your history, your finances, your current living situation. They're going to try to find the thing that makes you want to stop.
I've been sleeping at a bus stop in October, Hannah had said. They can dig. Patricia had made a sound that was almost amusement. Good, she'd said. Hold on to that. What nobody had fully anticipated was how the stress of the lawsuit would land on the household. Not in the way of conflict between Daniel and Hannah. They had, by April, built enough of a foundation that stress didn't knock them sideways the way it might have in the earlier months. But in the quieter, more insidious way of two people watching each other carry weight and trying to compensate, which sometimes helped and sometimes just added a different kind of pressure. Daniel threw himself into work. He'd been growing into the shop manager role since December, and Gary, who expressed approval exclusively through the assignment of larger problems, had been giving him increasingly complex situations to handle. He was good at it, better than he'd expected, because it turned out that the skills required to manage an auto shop were not entirely different from the skills required to manage a household of one adult and one 7-year-old on a budget that did not accommodate error. Attention, prioritization, the ability to stay calm when 3 things were wrong at the same time. But working harder was also a way of not sitting with the anxiety he felt about the lawsuit. He knew it. Hannah knew it. Neither of them addressed it directly for about 3 weeks, which was how long it took before Hannah finally said, on a Tuesday evening when Mia was at a school event and the house was quiet, "You're doing the thing." Daniel looked up from the work order he'd brought home. What thing? The thing where you fill every available space so you don't have to feel the feeling underneath? He set down the work order. That's a very specific diagnosis. I lived with myself for 2 years after the accident, Hannah said. I got very familiar with the technique. He looked at her. I'm worried, he said, about the lawsuit, about what happens if it goes sideways, about what it costs you every time you have to revisit it. I know you are. And I don't know how to help with it. There's nothing to fix. I'm not asking you to fix it, Hannah said. I'm asking you to just be here, in the room, not in the work orders. He set the folder on the table, pushed it aside. Okay, he said. I'm here. Good. She paused. Also, your truck needs its rear brakes checked. I can hear it from inside the house. He stared at her. Are you seriously? I'm just saying. Professionally speaking. I'm a mechanic, Hannah. And yet. He laughed. Actually laughed. The real kind. Sudden and unguarded. And the tension in the room shifted like weather changing. And she laughed too. And for a moment, the lawsuit and the work orders and all of it receded to the background where it belonged, and what remained was just the two of them in their kitchen on a Tuesday evening, which was not a small thing. The vocational rehabilitation program came through in May. Hannah had been working with a coordinator named James
through the county's rehabilitation office, building a plan that Maria had helped her navigate. And what the plan came down to was this. Hannah was a project coordinator with 7 years of professional experience who had been sidelined by a system failure. And the skills she had, organizational, analytical, the specific expertise she'd accumulated navigating inaccessible systems from the inside, were not just useful. They were, in certain contexts, exactly what was needed. There are 47 nonprofit organizations in Riverside County alone that work on disability services and housing, James had told her. And most of them have the organizational capacity of a mid-sized bake sale. Hannah had looked at him. That's a specific image. I've sat in a lot of their budget meetings, he said. What emerged from those conversations was something Hannah had started sketching out in a notebook she kept on her nightstand. Notes at first, then outlines, then something that started to look like an actual structure. She brought it to Daniel one evening in late May and set the notebook on the kitchen table. He looked at the pages, then at her. You're going to start a company. A small one, more like a consulting practice initially. But yes. What kind? Accessibility solutions, housing navigation, mobility accommodation planning, systemic advocacy for people with physical disabilities who are trying to interface with housing and social services. She paused. Everything I didn't have when I needed it. Everything that would have changed my situation if it had existed in the usable form. Daniel looked at the notebook again. The pages were dense with notes in Hannah's careful, precise handwriting. Organizational structures, service categories, potential funding sources, names of contacts she'd accumulated through the months of working with Maria and James. You've been building this for a while, he said. I started the notebook in February, she admitted. After Linda Pierce's final visit. After things felt stable enough to think about something other than the immediate. What are you calling it? She looked at him. Blake Accessibility Solutions, she said. I thought about using a different name, something more institutional sounding. But Maria said something that stuck with me. What did she say? She said, put your name on it, because you earned the right to put your name on something. And the people you'll be helping need to know that the person on the other end of the phone actually understands what they've been through. Hannah paused. She said, your name is the credential. Daniel was quiet for a moment. He looked at the notebook. He thought about the woman in the wheelchair at the bus stop on Garfield, in the October cold, with the gray-tinged lips and the flat, exhausted eyes that had stopped expecting anything. He thought about how much distance there was between that woman and this one, and how the distance hadn't been traveled by luck or by rescue or by anything external. It had been traveled by her. Every step of it. Yeah, he said quietly. She's right. The business registered formally in June. Maria attended the small, informal celebration Hannah organized at the house. Just the 5 of them. Daniel, Mia, Maria, and James from the rehab office, with a store-bought cake and sparkling cider and Mia's hand-lettered banner that said, "Congrats, Hannah," in alternating purple and green marker with a drawing of a wheelchair that bore very little resemblance to an actual wheelchair, but communicated the intent clearly. Hannah looked at the banner for a long moment. Then she looked at Mia. "Did you make that at school?" "At home," Mia said proudly. "Last night. Dad said not to tell you, but I'm bad at secrets." "I've noticed," Daniel said. "I love it," Hannah said. Her voice was steady. Her eyes, briefly, were not. "I'm keeping it forever." Mia beamed with a full-body incandescence that only she could produce. "I knew you would," she said. The lawsuit settled in September. Patricia Cho called Hannah on a Thursday morning with a number that was considerably more than 0 and considerably less than what the full damages would have been at trial. which Patricia said was the nature of settlements, and which was also the nature of the company calculating that a trial, with a plaintiff who had a read receipt proving supervisory knowledge of her location, was a risk they didn't want to take to a jury. Hannah sat with the phone in her hand for a long time after the call ended. Daniel was at work. Mia was at school. The house was quiet in the way it was quiet on weekday mornings. A productive, purposeful quiet. The quiet of a home that has people in it who are elsewhere doing necessary things. She'd expected to feel more. She'd expected the settlement to feel like resolution, like the closing of something that had been open and bleeding for 2 years. What she actually felt was more complicated and less clean than that. A kind of tired relief, a deep exhaustion from carrying the weight of it for so long. And underneath both of those things, something that surprised her. Something that felt almost like grief. Not for the settlement, not for the money. For the version of her life that the accident had ended. For the person she'd been before the scaffolding fell. She'd thought she'd grieved that person already, fully, in the months of hospitals and denials and the street and everything that followed. She'd thought she was done with it. But grief didn't work on a schedule, and sometimes the closing of one door opened another one you'd thought was sealed. She was still sitting with the phone when Daniel called. "How are you doing?" he asked. He'd known the call was coming today. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "That's okay." Patricia said it was a good outcome given the circumstances. Patricia's right. I know she is. A pause. "Daniel." "Yeah?" "I want to see Lily." Her voice was quiet and careful. Lily was her daughter, 9 years old now, living with Hannah's sister Claire in San Diego. Hannah hadn't seen her in 8 months. "I think I'm ready. I think I've been not ready for long enough." The silence on Daniel's end lasted only a moment. "Okay," he said. "Let's call Claire." "You don't have to come. I know it's complicated." "I want to come," he said. "Unless you'd rather go alone. That's completely okay if you would." Hannah thought about it. She thought about the road to San Diego, about sitting in a waiting room or a driveway by herself, about Lily's face, which she'd been tracking in photographs Claire sent. Lily growing and changing in the flat, two-dimensional way that photographs give you when you can't be present. She thought about having Daniel there, what that would mean, what it would feel like to walk, to arrive, with someone beside her. "I want you to come," she said. "Then I'll come." The drive to San Diego happened on a Saturday in October, almost exactly 1 year after the night at the bus stop. Neither of them marked the anniversary out loud. It was present between them. Daniel was aware of it, and he knew Hannah was aware of it. But they didn't name it. Some things don't need ceremony to be acknowledged. They exist in the quality of a silence, in the way two people sit beside each other in a car on the freeway, with the morning coming in through the windshield, understanding without discussion what the day means. Mia had stayed with Daniel's coworker, Marcus, who had redeemed himself considerably since the bedframe incident by turning out to be exceptionally good with children, and who Mia had decided was acceptable, on the grounds that he let her choose what to watch on television without arguing about it. Claire met them in the driveway of the house in San Diego. She was 2 years older than Hannah, with the same dark hair and a wariness in her face that Daniel could read. The protective wariness of a person who had watched someone she loved fall apart, and had stood in the gap during the falling, and who was now evaluating whether it was safe to hand things back. She looked at Hannah for a long moment. Then she stepped forward, and they held each other, tightly, briefly, the way sisters hold each other, when there is too much to say and not enough language for it. Then Claire looked at Daniel. He'd spoken with her twice on the phone before this, at Hannah's request. Brief, practical conversations about the visit, logistics, Timing. Claire had been polite and measured in the way of someone making careful assessments. She extended her hand. Daniel. Claire. He shook it. She looked at him for one more moment, the way people look at you when they're deciding something. Then she nodded. A single, deliberate nod that felt like something being granted. Lily's inside, she said. She knows you're coming. She looked at Hannah. She's been talking about it since Tuesday. Hannah closed her eyes briefly, opened them. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, let's go in. Lily was in the living room, sitting on the couch with a book open in her lap that Daniel suspected she hadn't been reading. She was 9 years old, with Hannah's dark hair and her own entirely particular face. And when Hannah came through the doorway in her chair, Lily looked up, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then Lily slid off the couch, crossed the room, and wrapped her arms around Hannah's neck, and pressed her face into her shoulder. Hannah held her daughter. Her hands on Lily's back were careful and fierce at once, the way you hold something you have been afraid you might not get to hold again. Daniel stood in the doorway. Claire stood beside him. Neither of them said anything. After a while, Lily pulled back. She looked at her mother's face. Then she looked at Daniel. Then back at Hannah. Is that him? She asked. The one from the bus stop? Hannah exhaled something that was almost a laugh and almost something else. Yeah, she said. That's him. Lily looked at Daniel with the frank assessment of a 9-year-old conducting an evaluation. Mom told me about you, she said. Good things, I hope, Daniel said. Lily considered this seriously. She said you make bad eggs. Mia told her that, Hannah said immediately. Mia is very communicative, Daniel said. She called Lily last week, Hannah said, with an expression that contained equal parts exasperation and helpless affection. They apparently talked for 45 minutes. About what? Captain Hopscotch, mostly, Lily said, as if this were entirely natural. And the grilled cheese. Daniel looked at the ceiling briefly. Of course. Lily looked between them with the rapid, accurate perception of a child who has spent time around adults who are complicated and has learned to read rooms quickly. Then she seemed to reach some internal conclusion, because she turned back to Hannah and said, Can we go to the park? Claire said there's a good path for your chair. Yeah, Hannah said. Her voice was full, in a way that she wasn't trying to contain. Yeah, let's go to the park. They stayed for 6 hours. On the drive home, after dark, with the freeway lights moving overhead in long amber streaks, Hannah was quiet for a long time. Not the closed kind of quiet, the processing kind. Daniel didn't push it. He drove and let the quiet be. After a while, she said, I've been building toward that visit for months, without admitting that's what I was doing. I know, Daniel said. Getting stable enough, getting the lawsuit resolved, getting Blake accessibility off the ground. All of it was. I needed to be someone I wasn't ashamed of before I could stand in front of her. You were never someone to be ashamed of. I know that now, Hannah said. It took a while. The freeway opened up ahead of them, dark and ordinary and wide. She likes you, Hannah said. She said I make bad eggs. That's her version of a compliment. She would have just ignored you if she didn't like you. Lily doesn't waste her energy on people she doesn't intend to keep. She sounds like someone else I know. Hannah turned her head and looked at him. There was a small smile at the corner of her mouth. The real kind. The one that had been gradually replacing the careful, managed version she'd arrived with. Thank you for today, she said. You did all the hard parts.
You drove 3 hours and stood in a doorway and didn't say a single wrong thing. That last part took more effort than you'd think. She made the laugh again, the full, real one. It had become one of Daniel's favorite sounds in the world, that laugh. He'd thought about that sometimes, in the way you think about things that accumulate meaning gradually. How you can't predict what will become important. How you can't know, standing at a bus stop in October, at almost midnight, that the sound of a particular laugh in a car on a California freeway a year later will be something you'd drive 3 hours for, without question, without hesitation. He drove. She sat beside him. The freeway moved beneath them like a river moving, the way it had always moved and would keep moving long after they were done with this particular stretch of it. "Hey," Hannah said, quietly, after a while. "Yeah." "I'm glad you turned around." Daniel kept his eyes on the road. He felt the words land in the specific, settled way of things that are simply true. "Me too," he said. The city opened up ahead of them. Riverside, ordinary and lit and familiar. The place where all of it had started, with a frozen night and a choice made in the cold. They came off the freeway and moved through the streets toward home, toward Mia, who was waiting with Marcus and a television remote and 45 minutes worth of things to report about her day. Toward the house on Mill Street that had begun as a series of desperate practical decisions and had become, without anyone quite planning it, the place where all three of them belonged. Hannah was looking out the window at the passing streetlights. Her hand rested on the center console, open, unhurried. Daniel reached over and took it. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. There wasn't anything that needed saying. Nearly a decade is a long time to become someone. Daniel understood this the way you understand things that happen gradually, not in a single moment of clarity, but in the accumulated weight of ordinary days, each one unremarkable on its own, each one quietly adding to the structure of a life, until you look up one afternoon and realize the structure is something you couldn't have imagined from where you started. He was 49 years old now. His hair had gone gray at the temples, in the way his father's had, which he'd been dreading for years, and which had turned out, in practice, to be something he barely thought about. He was the general manager of Reeves Auto Service, which had been Gary's shop until Gary retired 3 years ago, and offered Daniel the option to buy in on terms that were, Gary's word, reasonable, and which were in fact more than reasonable, which was Gary's way of doing something generous, without using any language that could be characterized as sentimental. The shop did well. Not dramatically well, solidly, sustainably well, which was the kind of success Daniel had always trusted more than the dramatic kind. The house on Mill Street had been traded for a house on Carver Avenue 4 years ago, a single-story ranch house with wider hallways and a properly accessible bathroom and a backyard large enough for the garden that nobody had planned on, but that had somehow become a central feature of their lives. Mia had started it, actually, with a school project about growing vegetables in the 5th grade, and it had expanded from there by the logic of things that nobody stops because everybody keeps enjoying them. It was in that backyard, on a Saturday afternoon in late October, that Hannah asked the question she had been carrying for 9 years. Mia was 23 now, and home for the weekend from the engineering program at UC Davis, where she was finishing her master's degree. She'd brought 2 friends, fellow graduate students, both of them deeply serious in the way of young people who have decided what they care about and are pursuing it without apology. They were playing some kind of elaborate lawn game of disputed rules in the far corner of the yard, and Mia's voice carried across the grass the same way it had always carried. Bright, certain, a little louder than strictly necessary, completely herself. Daniel was sitting in the chair he'd bought specifically for this backyard, one of those deep Adirondack chairs that he'd resisted for years on the grounds that they were impossible to get out of, and that he'd eventually capitulated to, because Hannah had pointed out that the difficulty getting out of them
was evidence that they were working correctly. He had a cup of coffee going cold in his hand, and he was watching Mia argue cheerfully with her friends about whether a line was in or out. And he was doing the thing he did more now than he used to. Simply being where he was, without running the numbers on what came next. Hannah was beside him. She'd moved from the manual chair to a lightweight power model 2 years ago. A decision she'd delayed longer than was strictly practical, because she'd always said the manual chair kept her upper body strong. Which was true, but which Daniel suspected was also about something more than that. The new chair was quieter than he'd expected. She'd named it, which was a thing she'd never done with any previous chair. And when he'd asked her why she'd named this one, she'd said, "Because this one feels permanent in a way the others didn't." He'd understood what she meant, and he'd filed it away in the place where he kept the things that mattered. She moved the chair slightly to angle toward him and looked at him for a moment with that particular expression, the one that meant she had something she'd been deciding whether to say. "What?" he said. What? "You have the face." "I don't have a face." "You have been married to me for 8.5 years, Daniel said, and you absolutely have a face." Hannah looked at him for another moment. Then she looked out at the yard, at Mia, at the friends, at the garden in its late October state. The tomatoes finished, the herbs still going, the roses she'd planted along the back fence in a concession to sentiment that she'd characterized as practical ground cover. "What if you had walked past?" she said. The question was quiet. It landed in the afternoon air without drama, without build-up. But Daniel felt the weight of it immediately. The full 9-year weight of it. Everything it contained. Everything that had happened, and everything that had almost not happened, sitting inside those 7 words. He didn't answer right away. He looked at Mia in the backyard, who was now apparently winning the lawn game based on the volume of her objections from the other 2. He looked at the garden. He looked at Hannah. "I've thought about that," he said. "I know you have." "More than once." "I know that too." She kept her eyes on the yard. "I think about the bus stop sometimes. Not the cold or the exhaustion. I've stopped being able to feel those things as clearly as I used to. But I think about what was in my head that night. How far I'd gone past the point of expecting anyone to stop." She paused. "I'd stopped expecting it. I want you to understand what I mean by that. It wasn't depression, exactly. It was more like I had done the calculation enough times that the math had become fact. Nobody stops. That's just how it is. That's the way the world works." "And then someone stopped," Daniel said. "And then someone stopped." She looked at him. "And I almost told you to keep walking." "You almost did," he agreed. "I was afraid of what it would cost me," she said. "To let someone in. To need someone. Because I had needed people before, and the math on that had also become clear to me." She looked at her hands. "What if I had told you to keep walking?" "You didn't," Daniel said. "But what if I had?" He set his coffee cup down on the arm of the Adirondack chair. He turned toward her as much as the chair's geometry allowed, which was not much, but enough. "Then I would have walked away," he said. "And I would have thought about you. I know I would have. I would have thought about you for years. The woman in the wheelchair at the bus stop that I didn't help. I would have added it to the list of things that sit wrong." He paused. "And my life, mine and Mia's, would have kept going. I would have kept working at Gary's shop. I would have kept making the eggs too hard. I would have kept being okay." He looked at her directly. "But okay is not what we have. And I know the difference now in a way that I didn't when I was just surviving it." Hannah was quiet. "What's the honest answer?" she asked. "If you'd walked past. Honestly." "Honestly?" He thought for a moment. "I think I would have been fine. I think Mia would have been fine. We'd have found our way forward, some shape of it. We're resilient people." He paused. "But I think there are things we never would have had. Things I couldn't have predicted I was missing because I didn't know they existed yet." He looked at the garden, at the roses along the fence. "I didn't know what it was like to be with someone who argues with me about the right way to make eggs and is actually correct. I didn't know what it was like to watch someone build a company from nothing, from a notebook on a nightstand, and become what you've become." He stopped, started again. "I didn't know what it was like to feel the difference between surviving your life and actually living it." Hannah made a sound that was small and real. "And for you," he said more quietly, "the honest answer for you—" "I know the honest answer for me," she said. They sat with that for a moment. The lawn game in the corner of the yard had apparently resolved itself, because Mia and her friends had moved on to something else. Some conversation with a rapid-fire quality of people who are exchanging ideas faster than their mouths can keep up. "Blake Accessibility turned 10 next month," Hannah said. The shift in subject was deliberate. She was done with the heaviest part of the question, and was moving through it the way she moved through hard things. Directly, completely, and then forward. "We're opening the San Diego office." "I know. I signed the lease documents." "You signed them enthusiastically." "I also know that you originally wanted to wait another year, and Maria talked you out of it." Hannah looked at him. "How do you know that?" "Maria told me. At the thing last month. She said, and I quote, 'Your wife was going to wait forever, so I made her stop waiting.'" "Maria needs to stop telling you things." "Maria has been telling me things for 9 years. It's a foundational element of our support system." Hannah made the laugh, the full one, the real one, the one that had never stopped being one of his favorite sounds, the one he had driven 3 hours to San Diego for, once, on a morning that felt like it belonged to a different version of his life, and at the same time felt like the direct and necessary road to this exact afternoon. Mia broke away from her friends and walked across the yard toward them with the loose, easy stride of someone who is completely at home in her body and her life. She was wearing a UC Davis sweatshirt and had her hair back, and she looked, in the particular way that grown children occasionally look, startlingly like both of them at once. Her mother's cheekbones and her father's way of moving. The specific confidence of a person who had been raised by people who believed she was capable of anything, and had spent 23 years testing the hypothesis. "Are you two doing the quiet backyard thing?" she said, dropping into the grass near their chairs with the practiced ease of someone who has never been invited to sit and has also never waited to be. "We were having a conversation," Daniel said. "A serious one?" "A 9 years in the making one," Hannah said. Mia looked between them with the rapid assessment she'd always had, the one that had been reading rooms since she was 5 years old. "The bus stop conversation?" she said. Daniel looked at her. "How do you know about the bus stop conversation?" "Dad, I'm 23. I've known about the bus stop conversation for years. You two have it periodically. You think I don't notice because I'm not here when you have it? But I notice the aftermath." She picked a piece of grass and looked at it. "It's the one where you figure out what everything cost and what it was worth, right?" Hannah looked at her daughter. Her daughter. The word fully and completely settled into place. Not as a claim, but as a fact. The way the most important facts eventually stop requiring any argument. And something in her expression did the thing it did when Mia said something that went straight to the center of a thing, without passing through the edges. "Yeah," Hannah said. "That's the one." Mia nodded. "So, what's the verdict this year?" "Worth it," Daniel said simply. "Obviously," Mia said, with the serene confidence of someone who has never doubted this. "Can I tell you something?" "Always," Hannah said. Mia looked out at the yard for a moment. Her friends were doing something across the grass, but she turned her full attention to this, which was a thing she did when something mattered. She gave it everything. "I've been working on the mobility algorithm," she said. "The predictive terrain one, for the chair navigation system?" She was in the final stages of a master's thesis focused on adaptive wheelchair technology, a direction she'd been moving toward since she was 12 years old, and had started asking Hannah specific questions about the chair that were less curious and more technical than Daniel had fully appreciated at the time. "I got a breakthrough last week." "A real one, not the kind where you think it's a breakthrough and then it falls apart at 3 in the morning. "Tell me," Hannah said. And Mia told her. She talked for 10 minutes about the algorithm and the terrain mapping and the weight distribution modeling, using language that Daniel followed to a point and then let go of. Not because he wasn't interested, but because there was something worth watching in the exchange itself. The way Hannah tracked every word with complete attention, asking precise questions at precise moments. The two of them in a technical conversation that had been building, without being named as such, since a morning 9 years ago, when a 7-year-old had carried a stuffed bunny across an empty apartment and handed it to a stranger. When Mia finished, Hannah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The weight distribution variable. Have you accounted for lateral incline variation? Because on anything more than a 3-degree cross slope, the predictive model is going to drift." Mia stared at her. "How do you know about lateral incline variation?" "I've been riding in a chair for a decade," Hannah said. "I know every failure mode you're trying to solve. Personally." Mia looked at her for a long moment, with an expression that started as surprise and resolved into something else. The specific look of a person who has just understood a connection that had been there all along, and that they had somehow, embarrassingly, not fully seen. "I want to talk to you about this more," Mia said. "Seriously. For the thesis. Would you—" "Yes," Hannah said immediately. "You didn't let me finish." "You were going to ask if I'd be a technical consultant for the user experience component, and the answer is yes. I've been waiting for you to ask." Mia stared at her. "You've been waiting?" "You were going to get there," Hannah said calmly. "I didn't want to push." Daniel looked at the two of them across each other in the afternoon light of the backyard and felt something so settled and complete that it had no sharp edge to it anywhere. Just the solid, warm weight of a life that was real. Not the life he'd imagined when he was younger. Not the clean-edged version that came before grief and accident and the particular random violence of circumstance. A different life. A harder one, in some ways, and more complicated, and built from materials he'd never planned to work with. A better one, in the ways that the word better actually means something. Mia's friends called across the yard. She stood, brushing grass off her jeans. "I'm going to hold you to that," she said to Hannah. "The consultation thing. I'm emailing you the draft chapter tonight." "Send it before 9, Hannah said. "I have calls tomorrow morning." "The San Diego office calls?" "And the Sacramento advocacy hearing. The accessible transit bill is in committee." Mia shook her head with the specific admiration of someone watching a person operate at full capacity. "You have too many things going on." "I have exactly the right number of things going on," Hannah said. "Don't send me the draft after 9. Mia grinned. That same full-body grin that had not changed in 23 years, not even slightly, and jogged back toward her friends. Hannah watched her go. Daniel watched Hannah. "She's going to change things," Hannah said quietly. Not with pride, exactly, or not only pride. With the particular conviction of a person who knows the shape of a problem well enough to recognize its solution when they see it walking across a backyard. "Yeah," Daniel said. "She is." The terrain algorithm is genuinely impressive. She was underselling it. "She gets that from you." "She absolutely does not. She gets that from you." "You once described rebuilding an entire engine as some work on the transmission. That's called being professional. That's called being constitutionally unable to overclaim." Daniel looked at her. The afternoon was going golden now. The particular October gold that belonged to this part of California. warm and angled, and the kind of beautiful that didn't announce itself, but was simply present if you were looking. Hannah was looking at the yard, at Mia and her friends, at the garden along the fence, with an expression that was open in a way that her face, in the early months, had never been. 9 years had taken the careful, managed composure she'd arrived with, the composure built from necessity, from the learned armor of someone who had been let down enough times to stop showing the places where it hurt, and replaced it with something more spacious. Not less guarded because the world had become less sharp, more open because she had decided, gradually and deliberately, that the armor cost more than it was worth. She turned and found him watching her. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "You have a face." "I don't have a face." "You have been married to me for 8.5 years," she said. His own words returned to him. "And you absolutely have a face." He smiled. She smiled back. There was nothing performed in either expression. Just two people in their backyard on a Saturday afternoon, with coffee going cold, and a daughter arguing cheerfully across the grass, and a garden along the back fence, and a decade of living the life that had almost not existed between them. "I'm glad I turned around," Daniel said. He'd said it before. He would say it again. It was one of those sentences that didn't diminish with repetition. It deepened. Every year added to what the sentence contained. Every ordinary day and hard day and good day, and the days that were simply the texture of a life lived alongside another person. Hannah reached across the space between their chairs and took his hand the way she'd taken it on the freeway 9 years ago, coming home from San Diego. Unhurried, certain, the gesture of someone who has decided what they're holding on to and doesn't feel the need to explain it. "I know," she said. Across the yard, Mia's voice rose above the lawn game again. Bright and certain and completely herself, the child of a man who had stopped at a bus stop on a cold October night, and a woman who had, against everything that had taught her not to, said yes to 3 words spoken into the dark. The afternoon held all of them, and the life that had almost never happened went on, real and imperfect and extraordinary, the way only lives that are genuinely lived ever are.